Welcome back to Ty and That Guy. I'm Wes Chatham, and I'm with my good buddy Ty Franck.
We're not going to do any Expanse today. We're going to take a break from talking some Expanse crap, and instead we're going to talk to one of Wes's friends and somebody that I've always been a big fan of. So let's bring him in.
And I want to tell before we introduce him, I want to tell a story that I think it'll do a lot to introduce Jason. So years ago, I sat down and met with Joel Schumacher for a film that he sadly never got to, and we met at the Chateau Marmont. And our guest is a friend of mine, and he said, mention that I said hello. And I sat down with Joel Schumacher, and I brought up his name, and he says, in this business, there's a lot of different reasons that somebody makes it or that somebody is successful as an actor. He said sometimes people have a right look and they're really lucky and they get the right opportunities and they get the right directors that work them through. Sometimes people, it's a complex reasons. It's very rare that somebody walks in and is just undeniable. Their talent is undeniable. Their level of understanding of the work is undeniable. Their look is undeniable. And he said that Jason Patric was one of those guys. And when he first met with Jason Patric, he thought, when he was casting the movie The Lost Boys, he thought, I can't have anybody else in this film but Jason, because Jason would elevate this film. And he really wanted, and he was dead set on Jason, but he said Jason was the only actor at the time of that generation that wasn't clawing their way to get into Lost Boys. And he offered Jason the movie, and Jason turned him down flat. And Jason at that point has only done one movie, and he turned him down, and it took him a year to get Jason into the movie. And I think that's a great way to introduce our guest, Jason Patric. Everybody.
How you doing?
How you doing, brother?
I'm all right.
So I was hoping the punchline to that story was after Joel said that to you, he ended by going, and I was really hoping you would be one of those people, Wes.
Well, no, what was funny is as he was saying that, I was like, I guess I'm not one of those undeniable types.
That's why I was feeding it to you, so you could understand, how the other half lives.
Right. Jason, do you remember how we met for the first time?
Man, doing the Valley Villa, right?
Yes. And so I was straight out of the military. It was my first really big, substantial film. I was working Tommy Lee Jones, Charlize Theron, Susan Sarandon, Jason Patric, Josh Brolin. It was this great cast, and I felt really vulnerable. It was me and another vet, Jake McLaughlin, was on this film. And Jason was the one actor that reached out to both me and Jake and said, "Hey, do you guys want to get a beer?" And if you're somebody that studied acting and you've grow up and you're a film nerd, you realize what the type of accomplishments Jason has in his career, and the fact that he's going to take the time to sit down with young actors and have a beer with them, and these are just guys off the street that are just dirtbags from the military. And we sat down and we had this, the greatest conversations. And what I realized is that I couldn't believe the level of his generosity because we spent hours drilling him about his career and his technique and questions about an actor, how he approaches his work. And he was extremely patient and kind with us, and we became great friends. He lives in Santa Monica, and we started doing runs together. And he's just been a great friend, a very loyal friend, and given me the best advice. And every time I get a new job, I usually will have a conversation with him about it, or we talk about it. So I'm really thankful for that. And I'm excited you get to do the show because I think it's going to be really interesting to interact with the audience and really go over the things that you've done in your career and the work that has been so important to Ty and I, or anybody that's in this profession.
And when we get there, I do have a story about one movie that Jason did that actually did change how I viewed story and probably indirectly is responsible for me eventually becoming a writer. So yeah, when we get to it.
And what's interesting is that, well, the only way I can understand it or it makes sense to me is that you have talent genetics. Your grandfather was Jackie Gleason. Your father was Jason Miller, who wrote and won a Pulitzer for a championship season. He was also in a movie that we've talked a lot on this podcast, The Exorcist, and we talked about it actually last episode. And then you got young Gus coming up in the rear, and this guy is Gus is Jason's son, and he sends me videos of Gus jamming out on the guitar. I mean, the kid, I've never heard anything like it. I mean, the kid is amazing on the guitar, and he has an amazing ear. And to be so young, I just think the force is strong with this family coming through. But the level of work that you were doing at such an early age, and Ty, we've talked about this before. And to prepare for this, and I knew that we were going to be sitting down and talk to you, and I've spent hours and hours with you, Jason, talking about each movie and each your choices and things as an actor. But what really blew me away that I'd never thought of before, and going back, is how young you were doing this level of work. I think only Marlon Brando or Orson Welles, or to be at this age and do that work. And if you go to an acting class and you see 20-somethings doing, or if you go see young people do plays or whatever, you see the gulf and the difference of doing this fine-tuned, mature work at such an early age. If you take The Beast or you take After Dark, My Sweet, you look at these films, or Rush. How old were you when you did Rush?
24. 24, yeah.
20? Fuck. I couldn't even tie my shoes at 24. I'm still struggling with that shit.
It's
use unbelievable
Velcro.
To me.
Yeah.
So growing up, and I think you and I have similar relationships to our fathers, and I think that's one of the reasons that we bonded. But I was curious about, where do you think, did that level of maturity or that understanding of the material, did that come from the household or working with him, or where did that come from?
It did. It came in. I think ultimately it did. Most of that come from my father, but not in the ways that one would normally associate with some sort of pass down. In truth, the sort of strict approach that I took and dedication to my work at that early age was because I saw how he wasted what he had. So it was not as if there was the set of protocols that were handed down that I followed. It was kind of the opposite, because I've always felt that sometimes what you learn most from your parents are what not to be. If you're really listening and you're really watching, you can see a manual of mistakes that have been made to learn from, as much as the sort of proclamations of what you're supposed to be. So that was a portion of it, but my mind was open to interpretation of material and characters without question through, myriad of conversations and just listening to my dad. He was very literate, very well read, obviously very talented, very good actor, and just the way he approached a scene or the dialogue made me at a very early age aware that there was so much more underneath the words, and the specificity of a word and a choice, and to get as much information you can about a character in that line of dialogue, in a gesture, in a movement, because that character only has so many syllables in his entire life. So you can't waste it. And you try to squeeze as much as you can out of it. There's only so many words that guy I played in Rush, his name was Rayner. He only has so many words he's ever speaking in his life. So if you mumble one of them or you make a mistake, one of you missed an opportunity to sort of flesh that character out. So I put a lot of pressure on myself early on. And it was serious, especially back then for me. Whatever I was going to do, I wanted to do it on a different level. So that was the...
How old were you when championship season had its first run?
I was probably around 6. And
wow.
we were quite poor. And my father, he told me the story. He came back one day and I was pushing my brother on this broken down playground in the building we lived in Flushing, Queens. And he was delivering welfare checks in Harlem or something like that. And he came up out of the subway and he walked by and he saw us in the distance. And as I said, I must have been 5 or 6. My brother must have been 4. And he said he started to cry and he said, "I'm getting them out of here." And he had the title in his head, that championship season, and he went up, didn't say hello to us, went in the elevator, went up, and started writing on yellow legal pads. First the title, and went with that, and then wrote the play. And then the play went off Broadway and was a big hit, and then went on Broadway and won everything, his first play. So it was quite, to go from nothing to in a year's time. Well, to actually go from nothing, and in 2 years' time, he has a Pulitzer Prize and he's nominated for an Oscar and he's in one of the biggest movies of all time. Is like,
wow. I don't know how old was he when that happened?
He was probably about 32 or something, 32, 33. I mean, you look at him in The Exorcist, he doesn't look 32 or 33. He looks 48. You know, I mean, he hard living. But you talk about The Exorcist, and it's once again amazing. His championship season, his first play on Broadway, playing Father Karras in The Exorcist is the first role he ever played in a movie. He'd never been in front of a camera. So it's pretty amazing.
Wow.
How did that role come about for him? Did Friedkin go see championship season, or?
Well, I've been told two stories, one by Friedkin and one by my father, and they are similar, and I sort of tried to make the twains meet on my own, but it is a pretty interesting story. But you hear a lot of things that aren't true, that everybody wanted to be in that movie, as you can imagine, because the book was so big. And my dad had an off-Broadway play, his first play called Nobody Hears a Broken Drum, that Roy Scheider was in. And it was a bomb, closed in a couple days.
Now, was this when Roy Scheider was Roy Schneider?
Roy Scheider after the French Connection. Wow. So everybody was vying to be, the French Connection was a couple years earlier. This was going to be Friedkin's next movie, and from this massive book. So everybody was vying to get in this play, in this movie. So Scheider told Friedkin, because they wanted to go see the play. And at the time, it was hard to get a ticket to. And he said, I know the writer. So he brought him to go see championship season. And he was just looking in the back of the playbill, and he read that my dad was an actor. But what Friedkin told me is he wanted to meet him because he found such an enormous resonance of the church and faith and belief. And it talks about the Jesuits and all these things. And Friedkin told me, he said, look, I'm a Jew and I'm doing this heavily, deeply religious story that I didn't know anything about. So he got his people to somehow get a hold of my dad's lawyer or something to have a meeting with Jason Miller. And he tells a story. He said, it was the worst meeting of my life. This is Friedkin. I'm at the Sherry Netherland or wherever he stayed, and I have the flu, and I have all these bottles of pills everywhere. And in walks your dad, not saying much, sits down. I tell him that I've seen the play and how wonderful it is. And I explained to him a little bit that I'm doing this thing and I wanted to get this idea. And he said, because I'm doing The Exorcist. And he said, I looked at your dad, totally blank, had no idea what The Exorcist was, when every kid in the world or every person on the subway is reading this purple paperback. They go on, talk. He said, my dad barely said two words. And then it was over. And Friedkin said, well, that was about nothing. Now, mind you, this wasn't for acting. He just wanted to talk to him as a writer about something. He ends up going back to Los Angeles. He says a couple weeks later, he gets a call. And his secretary says, it's Jason Miller on the line. And he says, okay. So he picks up the phone and he says to him, now at this point, he's already hired Stacy Keach to play Father Karras in The Exorcist. And this is after everyone from Paul Newman to everybody wanted to be in the thing. But he went to the studio and said, I want Stacy Keach, which they fought against too, because they wanted a big movie star. But Friedkin said, fuck you, I'm putting Stacy Keach in. So he gets a call, he gets on the phone, and he said, this is Jason Miller. And he said, I read your book, and I can play that part. And Friedkin was sort of stunned. He said, well, thank you for reading the book, but the part's been cast, and I really was just talking to you as a writer about all these other things. But, I appreciate, the call. And he said there was silence and a beat. And he said, well, you've made a great mistake. And Friedkin thought to himself, and Friedkin has a massive ego, which he will admit to. I mean, who the fuck is this guy? I'm the biggest director in the world now with my Oscar, doing the biggest book in the world in this movie. And this guy comes in that he was so taken aback that he said, okay, all right, we'll come out here Monday. And we'll do a screen test. Another beat. Other end of the phone. Oh, I can't make it by Monday. I don't fly. So he took a train out and they did a screen test. And Ellen Burstyn did not want him in it. Ellen Burstyn thought, who is this little guy that you're putting in this part? And they read and they did everything. And I think even my dad talked about being an altar boy, so he had him say mass. And there is that moment in The Exorcist of him saying mass alone. And that really came from those screen tests back then. And he did it, and he didn't think much of it because he hadn't been in front of a camera. But when the dailies came in, either later that night or the next day, he just said the camera loved him. And that was it. The camera just ate him up. So then he goes and he calls to get a hold of him. And of course, he's left the hotel and gone back to the East Coast. And Friedkin says, he remembers, he calls the studio and says, we got to pay off Keach. So what are you talking about? He said, well, I have someone else who's played Damon Karras. And they said, who's that? He said, Jason Miller. They had no idea who this was. He says, well, that's who's playing it. So and the head of the studio says, so you're telling me after we turn down every star in this town and we let you hire Stacy Keach and we pay Stacy Keach, and now you're telling me a guy who's never been in a movie before, who's a writer, is now going to star in this movie? And Friedkin said yes. And they said, over my dead body. And Friedkin said, well, fuck you then. I quit. Blah, 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 blah. Got him in. And that's how that happened. So it's one of those amazing stories that, of course, would never happen today. And is one of the sad things about what movies have become, what fame has become, what the idea, the false notion of notoriety. Because that performance that he gives in that is every bit as good as Michael Corleone. It's every bit as good as Travis Bickle. It's every bit as good as any 70s performance. And I would add, even harder because of the supernatural element that it deals with, where other people can be comfortable in playing things on the street like we'd seen in a more realistic manner and still be very powerful and very good, but no one had to do it at that level. And that movie is a classic and a masterpiece. The movie doesn't work if he's not playing that part.
No, I think if I think about that movie, one of the things that is so haunting about it is in his performance, the melancholy, the sadness, the vulnerability with the toughness.
Yeah.
So there's a combination of this strength and this toughness, but he had this incredible sensitivity to him.
But that goes back to interpretation, like I was talking about. He's not playing it as a holier thou priest. He's playing a man who happens to be a priest, who also happens to be a psychologist, who also happens to be put in this situation. And it's very different from how you see someone playing to the audience like they do today. And if you watch a genre movie, when you see the certain tropes that happen, actors are often, far too often, mostly often, 99% of the time, keying into what that is. So we know the type movie you're watching. He didn't do that. And, that's what makes it work.
And you get a sense of what he's up against. And that's what makes it so scary, because through his eyes, and he's just a man. There's been a ton of exorcism movies after that. It never had the same pop that The Exorcist did. It didn't have the same weight. It didn't have the same.
No.
And like you said, if it's an average man who sometimes doubts his faith, struggles with his faith, and he's up against this thing that is going to kill him, and he knows it's going to kill him, and he makes that heroic step anyway, makes that heroic choice at the end to have this thing come inside him. I think that's why the movie pops so much. It's interesting why you say Travis Bickle, because I read that he turned down Taxi Driver after this. Is that true?
Yeah, I don't think that's true. I don't know. I think that's internet stuff.
Oh, okay. Well, it's interesting, so let's just say it's true.
All right, we'll
it's
put
more
it
fun
in
if it is true. So Charles Durning, who's one of my favorite actors of all time, was in the championship season.
Right.
And you got to work with him on your very first movie on Sun Babies.
Did you mean Solar Babies?
Or Solar Babies, sorry. Solar Babies. And by the way, Solar Babies was on, when I was growing up, it was in HBO, it was on the rotation or whatever. And that's one of the things, I used to love that movie. But what was Charles Durning like? And did you guys talk about your father and talk about the championship season? And did you talk about World War II?
It was such, it was my first movie, and honest to God, I almost quit the business after. I wanted to. I was sent there, and we shot it in Spain, and this was Mel Brooks's company, who had just made Francis and Charing Cross Road and The Elephant Man, and this was going to be there. So it was presented in such a different way, and even though I was only 18 or something, or maybe I just turned 19 and got there. Remember, there's no cell phones and all that shit back then. This is 85. And I've never been out of the country. And in 2 weeks, I'm saying, this is horrible. Calling my agents, telling them they can keep the money and send me back. You can't do this. You don't know what you're talking about. I do know what I'm talking about. Trust me, I know what I'm talking about. They wouldn't. And so Charlie, he came there probably he might only worked for a couple days. So I talked to him a little bit. He was very close, and he really loved my dad a lot. because Charlie was much older than the other guys when he did Championship Season. As you said, people didn't know that he was in the Battle of the Bulge and things. He was a serious fucking guy. But what was nice is when we did the revival 10 years ago, Charlie came to it. And he was just, he was suffering some dementia, but he did watch the play. We all took pictures with him afterwards, and it was nice to see him because he is one of the great character actors, one of the great American actors, without question.
When did you make that choice that this was going to be your path? And seeing what it did to your dad, like what made you decide that this is something that you wanted to do at such an early age?
Well, I mean, I didn't necessarily know because I think everybody asked me my whole life, and that bothered me. Everyone just assumes you will do that. So I did a Shakespeare festival my junior year of high school where you built sets and took college courses, during the day, and then you auditioned and maybe played a soldier. And it was a whole summer in Champlain, Lake Champlain in Vermont. And I just really enjoyed the theater a lot. I loved the feeling, everything about it. So by the time I was a senior in high school, the whole movie business had shifted. With these John Hughes things, all of a sudden, young people were stars of movies and adults were playing the supporting roles. That had never been the case before. There had been an occasional movie that was about young people, but now the whole business was tilting. And all of a sudden, teenagers were stars of major movies. And so,
where do you think the tipping point of that was? Because I remember when that happened. What was the movie? Do you think that really tipped that over?
Well,
was it John Hughes?
It was John Hughes, but I think if you really go back to probably E.T., because if you look at the amount of money that E.T. made at that time, it was just the biggest of all time, and it was kids. It was kids and this. Because before that, Spielberg was not making kids' movies, which he became known for in some ways. He was making adult movies. But that was such an extraordinary hit that I think that was 82 or something. And who knows? I don't know culturally what was going on that also made that shift. But absolutely was cemented by the John Hughes movies.
Yeah, because I remember when it happened. I remember because I was a kid of the 80s. I remember when I started going to the movies, and almost every movie I saw starred people around my age.
Right.
And it was a very new thing. Yeah.
It was a new thing. Now, you can go back to Rebel Without a Cause, and without question, that was one of the first movies dealing with teenage angst and what it is. Now, you do have
or Splinter in the Grass.
Yes. Those guys are older than the parts they're playing, but, so was, a Judd Nelson or people like that. But those, as I said, those were sort of singular type, movies.
Yeah, but all those 50s teen films were all warning films. Yeah. They all felt like PSAs. They all felt like teenagers are going to get in trouble. Teenagers are inherently bad. They all felt that way. It wasn't until you got into the 80s where it was like teenagers were allowed to have fun. They were allowed to just do the stuff they wanted to do, and it wasn't like a warning.
They all were dealing with the issue of angst in some way, though. Unlike the Beach Blanket movies, which were supposedly teenagers, the early 60s and stuff. They're all the John Hughes movies are dealing with the popularity or not being popularity or not having money or falling in love or not, or what it means, or being a geek or being seen as something. So he sort of tapped into that idea of growing up. And I think ultimately there were elements of all that folded into Lost Boys that made it last. And as the years went on and on, it grew bigger and bigger than it was ever.
Now, were you pissed off about your experience with Solar Babies? And so is that why you told Joel Schumacher no?
It was
and it took him a year to get you in the movie?
Well, it wasn't quite a year, but it was partially that. I came back and I was very depressed from that situation, being away for 4 months. And I look back now, it's ridiculous. You were 19, who cares? 4 months. But to me, as I said, in my mind, I had set these standards so high that I thought, this is horrible. So I remember I read for this play, and I ended up, telling Jamie Gertz, I said, look, there's this play that's going to be, at this Coast Playhouse, which was a good playhouse on Santa Monica Boulevard time. I said, I'm going to read for it, but I'm going to get it. So if there's a part of a girl too, and if you want to work with me, I'm definitely getting it. So you can come along for the ride. And, I wasn't offered it. I went into a room with 30 other people, but I said, there's no question I'm going to get this. So because I thought that part of saying that, and I'm not saying in an ego way, is that
No.
I put that bar for myself that I had to wash away Spain and Solar Babies from my head. And I figured if I don't get this, I'm doing something else. Once again, I'm 19, all of a sudden changing my entire life at 19, saying I'm giving up. But so I did it, and I did get it, and she did get it as well. And then while I was doing that, I went in to go meet for this movie. And the only reason I went in to go meet, I had no desire to do a vampire movie, was the casting director was a very famous casting director named Marion Dougherty, who helped find James Dean and tons of other people. And she and my people said, you should at least go meet Marion. She's going to do lots of stuff. So I went to go meet her. And then she had me then come in and then meet Joel. And then, I didn't want to do it.
And how did he eventually convince you?
Money.
And what's crazy to me is at this day, like if I would have read the Lost Boy scripts, I would have murdered Ty.
But you wouldn't have, because first of all, that's another sort of misnomer. The script was terrible, and the sides were terrible. And the real writer of Lost Boys is not the people that you see on the script, whoever their names were. I don't think I ever met them. It's Joel Schumacher and the cast that he let give their input to. He collated and collected and judiciously and instinctually hired such good people and let each one give what he thought they could give, and was very, look, it's 1986. I'm not in any movie. I'm in a movie that I just, was a terrible decision. And he gave me lots and lots of creative power and control on a big studio movie. So the script wasn't good. What happened was he would always want to come in, we take these walks, we go to lunch, and he'd say what it's going to look like, how I'm going to surround you with great actors, you're going to be a movie star, blah, blah, blah. That stuff didn't really appeal to me. But eventually, I don't know what it was. I think he got Diane Wiest, who's just coming off an Oscar, and then Bernard Hughes and some people. And then, and he promised me I'd never have to wear teeth, I'd never have to wear makeup, and I'd never have to fly or anything like that. And he lied about all that.
You did. So my wife Jen, when we do this
I
podcast,
know her well.
We talk about on this podcast a bunch of movies. So I usually have Jen, come and watch. She usually doesn't like if it's past 1998. If it's older than that, she doesn't like it. But we watched The Lost Boys last night, and she loved it. And she was really into it, and I think there's a time that it is so far ahead of and beyond other vampire movies in those 80s. Like I think we talked about Fright Night at one time, or you talk about these other things, but even the makeup and how it is visually holds up. I think the vampires look great in that. What was it like to work on that? And I know you and Kiefer are good friends. Is this the first time that you met Kiefer?
Yeah. Yeah, that was one of the selling tools that Joel had, too. I mean, people have said that before. Oh, it's a guilty treat, Lost Boys and cheesy 80s. There's nothing cheesy about the movie. It's shot by the guy who shot Raging Bull, shot by the guy who shot Taxi Driver.
Michael Chapman?
Yes. It's production.
Michael Chapman shot
Lost Boys. I mean, and this is Joel Schumacher saying, we're not getting the guy who shot Raging Bull to shoot just a cheap little vampire movie. I mean, he got the top people that there were. And the fact is, it's beautifully shot. The makeup of V. Neal and Greg Cannon, these people all have many Oscars amongst them now. They didn't then. This is the movie that launched them. Joel's the one who came up with that idea of having this makeup that sort of was an outgrowth of your own face. So it would be scary, but still retain a visceral, feral, sexual aspect to it. That hadn't happened before. You've watched the movie again. You don't see a vampire's face in a vampire movie for the first 45 minutes. It's similar to Jaws, where you don't see that shark. You see the POV. You see the reactions. It's restrained. No one had done a soundtrack like that becomes part of a movie in that realistic way. The colors, the dialogue, the acting. That's Joel putting all that together. And then knowing that if I put great people around me and I can sort of orchestrate it, it's going to be special. So there's no question in my mind that he was And we were trying for something really special. And I probably knew that more than anyone because he spent so many weeks and weeks trying to get me in it that he probably explained and talked about it to me more than anyone.
And did you get Gertz into it?
Yeah. We were doing that play.
Yeah.
And there were, once again, I read with a lot of girls. I mean, Joel was giving me a lot of input. And I said, it wasn't written like Jamie. And I said, I just worked with her twice. I was in Spain. She's a really great person. I think there's a really sort of bohemian sexiness about her if she, with what you do, Joel, because he knows how to find someone and bring out their best qualities, certainly visually. And it wasn't his type at all, but he came to see us in the show and met her.
Tell me about it. It wasn't his type.
Yeah.
The one flaw that I have in that movie is Jamie Gertz gets no screen time. And look, he loved you with that camera, and he photographed Jason. I'm like, can we get a little Jamie Gertz every now and then there?
But she does look gorgeous in it, though.
Everybody looks gorgeous in that. Everybody, but I think if we did like a top 10 or top 5 most gorgeous out of that film, I'm sorry, Jason, but I think the saxophone player with the dog collar chain.
No, the sax player wins 100%. Yeah.
It's all right.
The coolest man who has ever lived.
What? So that was a summer would you shoot that in Santa Barbara or Santa Cruz?
We did a month in Santa Cruz, and then the next 3 months were down at Warner Bros. On the stage. And then we did a couple things outside. I think that trellis scene is somewhere, that trellis where we're hanging underneath that train track, that's somewhere in California, maybe, I don't know, Valencia, Ventura or something. But most of it was stage stuff, and the exteriors, most all of them were up there in Santa Cruz, yeah.
And what were y'all falling into? I was curious about that. When you guys are hanging on the things and you fall into the fog.
Well, it's just done.
And that was a long ass fall.
Well, it's just done in different ways. I mean, obviously there was a real trellis that they were filming, and then they had long shots. What's great about Lost Boys is that stuff's all in camera. Now with CG, who gives a shit what goes on? Nothing's interesting. You have to come up with stuff. There's some great matte paintings there, and they had to come up with real old-fashioned effects. So, for example, for that trellis, we're up there, and they had us wired in at some point hanging so you can get long-distance shots. And then the close-up stuff is really from that trellis. And then when we drop into the sort of clouds, that was in a studio that they just filled up with as much smoke as you could. And then we just dropped, I don't know, 10 or 20 feet into a mat until we disappeared. And then when I'm falling, they had me standing straight up, basically on a rotating lazy Susan type device. So if my head was here, I'm standing like this, and then they had the camera connected to me, and we were going on a long dolly. So as it went through a studio that was just loaded with smoke, it's following me this way, and I'm appearing to fall as it sort of moves and moves, and then they just reverse it so it looks like I'm going down. But I mean, effect like that is so much more haunting than being able to create that digitally. And all those things, the flying is active with wires, and there's a couple green screen things, but it's all active stuff that they had to do. And it's just that stuff. You can do amazing things with CG, but I think everything's bored with them now. And your mind's eye knows when something's real. There's something instinctually you can just feel.
Being on a movie set now, and I always talk to the old makeup artists or DPs that have been in the business for a while, and I hear stories about shooting in the 80s, and I'm like, why the fuck? Why couldn't, I want to experience that where they have trays of cocaine in the makeup trailers and all this just these banana stories that I hear, these crazy stories. I would imagine that this set must have been wild. Was it one of those wild 80s sets?
If you talk to Kiefer and the Lost Boys, yes, but not for me. I mean, I just felt that there was so much pressure on me, they all have their own little niches, but I'm working with every character. I'm working with her. Mm-hmm. I'm working with Corey. I'm working with Diane Wiest. I'm working, Grandpa. I'm working with Kiefer. I felt that, and I had to balance it in a way to try to make it where I wouldn't just be this boring dolt. And and I was very, very disciplined, very disciplined. I mean, I wasn't drinking or doing any of that kind of stuff.
I mean, that is the tricky part about that character, though, is there's a version of that where he just winds up being the straight man for every joke. Right?
Absolutely.
Because he's the guy that has to bounce off of all these other crazy characters. So that is a tricky one to pull off, to make him shine in his own light and not just be the guy that's, there to observe the wackiness. Right.
And it's one of the things that I talked to Joel about. I mean, even everyone else is in their crazy clothes or sexy clothes, this and that. I'm in jeans and a t-shirt. I wanted to find a way to make that character about something more than a guy all of a sudden sees vampires. And, part of that would be, there was, without question, watching my father's interpretation of that character. He wasn't just playing a priest going to get the devil, because that's what you see in these other exorcist movies. He's playing a guy who happens to be a guy who's losing his faith, and his mother just died. Now someone wants to help him with his daughter, and he doesn't want any part of that. And then he comes in. So for me, I was playing that part. I went in there as a guy who is a kid who's just of that age where his dad's gone now and his mom sort of wants him to be the dad, and I'm not the dad, and I don't want to be taking care of my brother, and I don't want to be going to school. And these people, all of a sudden, there's something about belonging, and even the blood and drinking all that. I just made that about drug addiction. All of a sudden there was something that felt great and powerful and driven towards these other things. And then there was a portion of his self pulling back from completely going into to that other side. Now, some of that comes through, but I think it makes that person real, and you believe his struggle, whether you understand it or not. So to me, that's how you made Michael this person that's just not there for everyone to bounce off. He's living this own very difficult reality with these real things that a young man coming of age would be experiencing, and they're just accentuated by everything going on.
And Diane Wiest, she really, the role of the mother, could you imagine if somebody else other than her played that role? She really popped it in a way and made it the love that she had for her children, the struggling to keep things together. And it's just, again, what this movie could have been and what it ended up being. And there's a reason why I can watch that movie last night and I just get lost in it, enthralled in it. And I love genre, but I like genre on this level. I like how it's firing on all cylinders. It's such a beautiful, I think this is, one of Schumacher's best things that he's ever done.
It's his best movie.
And it's his best movie. And I can't believe you guys had Michael Chapman. And has Michael Chapman worked with Schumacher before or
Nope.
since?
Nope.
And the way that the boardwalk and over the water and the way that it was shot.
Spectacularly shot.
So when you see Gertz for the first time and you get entranced by her, I only seen that work that Romeo and Juliet, where you got to have that moment of falling in love like that, because that is the foundation, the catalyst that the whole story is built off of, right? And I've only seen it done a few times where that's all you need, just the way that he looks at her and she looks at him, and that moment where from that point forward, your character arc, who you were before that, is different than who you were after that look. And you're entranced and you go for it. And it was all done with the look, the way that it was photographed, was that on a crane? The way it came around over and you're in the crowd and you see her and those beautiful baby blues are locked onto her, and she looks back at you, and then she goes and you're chasing her, and then now your brother doesn't have a brother anymore because now you're on this path,
right?
And you're going and you're on the way to her. That was incredibly powerful, and that's what that's the catalyst where how everything starts happening. That's what the movie hangs on.
Yeah, well, it usually does go that way, doesn't it? It's usually there's some form of desperate horniness that starts everything in movement.
That's every time Wes and I meet again in person, it begins with that.
Yeah, that's
that look.
That look.
Yeah. We give each other that look, and we just know where it's going. Yeah.
And then you get the sax, and Wes gets the oil.
Oh my God. That's just a good night.
Yeah. And then we chain ourselves together with that chain that goes around the neck. Now, I don't know, Ty, have you ever met my buddy Tim Clemente?
I don't think so, no.
All right, so so to talk about this next movie, so my buddy Tim Clemente, he was the military advisor. I met him when we were doing the unit. He's a good pal of mine. He was a contractor in Iraq for many years. He's a hardened old soul. And at the time, he called me, and Jason and I were doing a pilot called Powers in Chicago. And he says, he goes, oh, who are you doing a pilot with? And I go, I'm doing it with Jason Patric. And he goes, Beast of fucking War, man. And I said, what? He goes, Beast of fucking War. And he told me this story that he was in New York and he was walking down the block and he saw this poster for Beast of War. And he didn't see any advertising. He didn't see any trailers or anything he said, but he saw the poster and was like, I got to see this movie. He goes into the theater. He says, it's one of the greatest war movies I've ever seen. It's got so much balls, you know? And so when I go back and talk to Jason about it, and I went back and watched it, and I can't believe this would have been one of my go-tos growing up. I do not know how this movie got under my radar, how I missed it. It is a badass tank movie. And how did this happen? How do you go from...
Isn't the title of that movie just The Beast?
Yeah, it's The Beast.
Yeah, The Beast, yeah.
And it's what they call the tank.
Yeah. No, I know. I've seen the movie multiple times. I love that movie.
And how did you make this choice? And who would, okay, so you do the Lost Boys at this point. Now you can kind of not do what you want, but you can make certain choices. And how many other people would make choices just to get seen more, to do the more popular type movies, to get into these type of 80 type things? Who's going to choose to go to fucking Afghanistan? I know you probably weren't in Afghanistan, but wherever it was, it didn't look like a good time. How did you hear about the movie, and how did it come about you choosing to be a part of that? Because I'm sure at this time you could have done whatever you wanted to, right?
Well, Lost Boys was in the can. I mean, so it hadn't come out yet, but certainly I was getting a lot of pressure from now all of a sudden CAA signs me, and a lot of pressure to do a lot of these other things. Now, what you want to do always, and they tell you, is, of course, get your next 3 movies before the one in the can comes out. And I just did the opposite. I said, it just didn't matter to me. So I had read this script, and then everybody wanted to be in this script. What had happened was there was a man named David Putnam who was an English producer. He had produced, Chariots of Fire. He had done really well-made documentaries in England, and he was quite a big deal there. And Columbia Pictures, who I think at the time was owned by Coca-Cola, decided to hire him to run the studio. And it was going to be this whole new thing. This was 86, where Hollywood studios were going to make different type movies, like Chariots of Fire and all these things. He was going to give the power to the filmmakers. He lasted 1 year, by the way. He came in to run Columbia Pictures, and they were going to make this movie called The Beast, and by this director, Kevin Reynolds. So all the young actors knew about it because it was a really good script. I mean, Kiefer talks about reading for it and really wanting it and this and that. So I got it, and I went in like everybody else, met the director, and then eventually I read. And then the interesting story is that Kevin Reynolds was good friends with Kevin Costner. He had done his first movie, and Kevin Costner wanted to play my part. And the movie, his big movie, The Untouchables, hadn't come out yet, but he was about to become a massive star. And I found out about that after I'd already read. I thought I did a good job in the going on tape, but the word was that Costner would do it, and he would do it for barely any money. But David Putnam said to Kevin Reynolds, he said, "You're the filmmaker. If you want to hire this unknown kid, you could hire this unknown kid." And he did. And
God.
And that's how that happened. Because otherwise that would have been Costner. And so,
it works. It works so much better with a young guy, though.
Yeah, but
because a big part of what makes it work is how young that character is. People have described that movie as Russia's Vietnam movie, right?
Yeah.
Russia's version of Platoon. And I think the thing that makes Platoon work is that Charlie Sheen looks like a baby. He looks like he's 19 years old, and all the horror around him. And I think that character, the character you're playing in that movie, if he doesn't look like a 19-year-old or a 20-year-old surrounded by all this horror, I don't think the movie works as well. I mean, I love Kevin Costner, but I think he would have been the wrong choice for that.
Well, even if it wasn't me, he would be the wrong choice for it. That's
so Kevin Reynolds, so he cut his pal loose and brought you on.
Yeah, and they had problems
because he was friends with him.
Yeah, no, that caused a problem. But Kevin Reynolds was a bit of a rebel back then. So yeah, it's one of those. I'll tell you, so that David Putnam, we make the movie, he gets fired, and so now Columbia comes to me and says, we want to give you a production deal. I'm 21 years old, and
God.
So I sit down, we'll give you office and all that, and I said, all right, man. And Lost Boys hasn't come out yet. We filmed that in Israel for 3 months. I come back, it's July or something, and now all of a sudden I'm super hot because the studio wants to give me a production office and this and that. I got this movie coming out that people think is going to be good, or whatever the kids maybe like. And so Lost Boys comes out, does pretty well. And the studio has new ownership because they fired this guy. And I think it was Dawn Steele or someone who came in. And so they said, want to give you this production deal. I said, well, what about The Beast? Because they were going to shelve it. I said, you're giving me a deal off this movie, but now you're telling me that you're not going to release this movie. Now, mind you, once again, I'm 21 years old talking to the head like this. And so I convinced them to put it out. They put it in 2 theaters for 1 week. So if your friend saw it in a theater, it was 1 theater in New York and 1 theater in Los Angeles for 1 week.
Get the fuck. Are you telling me that Timmy was walking by the 1 theater in New York that was playing The Beast?
It was only in
the 1 neighborhood? Because it was the poster that he saw.
Yeah.
It wasn't, he didn't hear about it. He goes, I was walking by. You've met Timmy. Did he tell you about?
I don't know. Military guys love this movie. Whenever I'm doing something, there's a technical advisor or you just meet, they all know this movie, and which shocks me because it played in two theaters for 2 weeks. So somehow they got hold of a VCR because there wasn't even DVDs back then, And people do put it in their top 10 list of war movies, and it is really good. There's really good acting. There's never been tank stuff like that. Once again, we're driving real tanks, real T-55s, and there's no CG. We found, I don't know, we're shooting steam or water cannons out. It was really difficult to make, extremely difficult. We did a whole boot camp with Dale Dye, who had just come off platoon. It was tough to do, man. It was tough. And Israel, and we were in Israel.
All of my friends saw it, so I guess we were all watching it on VHS.
Yeah,
because everybody I knew who had seen it.
Yeah, no one had seen it.
Yeah, I mean, once it got out on VHS, I think a lot of people saw it.
And if you're listening to this, you can watch it on YouTube now. You can get it off YouTube and watch it. Now, I'm drawing a blank on the guy's name. It's the best performance I've ever seen him do. The guy that goes crazy in the film. Yes, he was phenomenal in that.
Well, he looks different because he's normally 250, 300 pounds. He lost over 100 pounds to play that part.
And that's why I didn't really recognize him at first. But when he wanted you to run over the guy underneath the tracks and you were hesitating, he grabbed your hair and jerked your head back and forth and all that. And then I didn't even really recognize him until halfway through the movie.
Yeah.
Of who he was. I was like, Jesus Christ, he's good. And our buddy Don's in it. Don. Yeah. And I think Don was great in it. And was that a good experience, the whole shooting of it?
Yeah, it was very hard. It was a good experience. But as I said, we did a boot camp, just us and Dale Dye in the middle of the Negev desert for 10 straight days, where he just gave us a shovel and a poncho and said, go make a hooch. Go make a hooch. I don't know what any of that means. And, I remember they gave us a shovel and a little bendable, a foldable shovel, and I put it in the hard ground, and the shovel just went like this, just totally bent. Reynolds loved the whole thing because, once we started, after our 10 days of boot camp, we were filming on those sort of day 12. So we were this unit that could actually drive a tank, load a tank, fire a tank, do all that stuff. And we were so hardened into the roles. I mean, it's 115 degrees during the day and then 45 degrees at night, and sleeping out like that and doing that for 10 days. He had this great machine that was ready to go. That's it's so realistic too. No one thinks for 2 seconds that we don't know what we're doing in there, because we do know what we're doing in there. I can't change a spark plug, but I could drive a T-55 or traverse it blindfolded by day 9 in the desert and point out every feature of it, because you just have to do something. And that's what I wanted to do as an actor, not just get those roles. And it was never about the fame for me. It was about, what are you going to get from this, from your life experience? And that's why I've never had a conventional career. And a lot of people believe I've had a failed career. And they're right from their perspective. If I tried to make a career, what I tried to do is see what this business or doing this would mean to my life at any given stage. It was never, what can this role do for me? It was always more of, okay, what can I say at 24 with this person and this script about my life? What can I get, from that experience that would mean something? So going to Israel and being there for 4 months and learning to drive a tank and studying about the war and the situations and working with those people, that's an experience you can't have, and you certainly can't have it now. There's no GPS and no cell phones. There's just, okay, here you are, man. And you push yourself.
Hey, Wes.
Yeah.
I can totally see why you and this guy are friends, because this is how you talk about your career.
I unfortunately taught him too much.
But what's interesting is, Jason was the first guy that I met, especially coming and being green and not knowing everything. But Jason was the first guy that I met that looked at the work differently than all of the other actors in this business, or what. I feel like, there is a collective feeling in the atmosphere of competition when you go to LA. And that competition is more to be seen or to be liked or to have a certain level of fame or a certain level of money, but all of it doesn't have a lot to do with the work. And so I meet Jason, and I think and maybe because he had experienced it when he was so young, but he's somebody that is completely immune to the siren call of fame or money or any of that. And when we would have our conversations, his passion and his love was all about the story, was all about the work. It's the only thing that he cared about. He didn't care about all the other stuff was ancillary. Almost all the other stuff got in the way. And, if like what you said, Jason, if you said that if people knew you, they would know that you're doing what you want, how you want to do it, and when you want to do it. And being 20 and having the keys to the kingdom and somehow resisting, which, you could have done whatever you wanted to, and resisting that because you had you wanted to express yourself for where you were in that moment. You wanted to do artistic. You wanted to go do The Beast and not go do whatever the movie was at the time. And I thought that was so interesting. And it also resonated with me because what I realized is that our only currency of an actor, the only thing that really matters is how you can contribute to the work. Where is your craft? If you show up, are you bringing something? And it doesn't matter how many people follow you on Twitter or follow you on Instagram. It doesn't matter how famous you are. There's so many stories or so many times where people are personalities, or they have, and they get put in these vehicles, they get put in these movies, and they make movies, and those movies might make money, but it doesn't add value to the world. It doesn't change anybody's life. And I think I heard you say one time, Jason, that there was a time in the film industry, in theater, where actors would express themselves creatively where they were in their lives. And now actors are just trying to follow the zeitgeist of what's going to make money, what is the strike zone to get eyeballs, whatever. So that's why when you go back and you watch, that's why we were so floored. Like the first time you see The Godfather, the first time you see Jaws, the first time, it's because they're following their creative expression, and it's new, and it's a new thing. They're not trying to chase something. They're not trying to validate something that's already been there. And so that you start to find that, and that's what's exciting. I think that is with The Expanse. Ty, we've talked about this with The Expanse. This sci-fi show being on, and being, part of an ensemble cast or whatever, wherever I was at the time, it wasn't very exciting to your team, or wasn't very exciting to the people that represent you or anything like that. But I just happened to know the books and be a fan of the books, and also love that genre, and saw what it was. And we're just lucky and blessed.
I'm sure your agents would have been thrilled if you had gone and done 47 Hunger Games knockoffs. like I'm sure that they would have
Right.
been thrilled by that. Like, just do Hunger Games knockoffs over and over and over again.
or CSI, you know,
Yeah.
or, you know,
Yeah.
but not. I would totally. There's nothing. I would totally. You know, I don't have any. I'm just saying there's a different kind of thing, but it ended up being, you know, this incredible experience working with this character and this story and doing this stuff. But I think, you know, I'm very lucky to become friends with Jason when I did, like when I was brand new in the business, how generous he was towards me and how generous he was to many different actors. I mean, he's mentored so many, you know, your relationship with Matt Damon, your relationship with a lot of young guys coming up. You always took the time to share your knowledge, to share what you know. And that, I'm sure you know this, Ty, even in your industry, you know, as a writer, like that kind of generosity and somebody to take that time when there's no benefit to themselves and have some dork like me just ask him, like, talk to him about 3.5 hours. I mean, if we clock how many times I've asked him about the Lost Boys and him not just be like, all right, shut the fuck up about the goddamn Lost Boys, you know?
Oh, I think we're going to get there before this is over with.
But the patience that he had and everything like that meant a lot to me. And I want to, you know, I want to be that for other people coming up too. And also, not only that, the movies that Jason, like, you know, you introduced me to Hal Ashby. I mean, you know, I thought I knew a lot about movies, but, you know, I remember you talking about how he's one of the greatest directors that you ever saw. And I remember going back, watching all his movies, you know, reading books about him, looking at all the movies that he cut when he was an editor and seeing like the genius. And so there's a certain language of all these that I acquired through our, you know, talks and also too the you know, and I'll just go on for our friendship here in a second. But I remember going to I had an opportunity to meet with the Coen brothers and I had to go to New York. Jason's like, stay in my place in New York. You know, go there, stay, and I got to stay in this place in New York. Got to meet with the Coen brothers, just little things like that. And I'll tell one story before we move on. I was doing the Mockingjay movies, and I remember being in the hotel room, and I was, you know, and as you know, Ty, I have an interest in writing and telling stories, and so I wrote this short film, and I sent it to Jason, and this guy, like, you know, some of the greatest filmmakers will tell you stories of how they couldn't get Jason in their movies or couldn't do anything. And I said, hey, Jason, I got this short film and I have a little money in the bank and I want to do it. And he's like, fine, when do you want me to show up? And it just, you know, it just meant so much to me because he didn't hesitate. You know, even like doing this podcast, he never hesitated to help somebody like that. But to think about, you know, how many, it took Joel Schumacher a year to get him in the movie. And my little shitty, you know, short, which I have, which we still haven't, you know, had the time or anything to do. But just the fact that he read it and was like, yeah, I'll do this. I think it's great. It's funny. I remember one more story. I remember we were doing, Jason, I don't know if you remember this, but we were doing Powers and I was playing a cop. And you know the comic book Powers, Ty?
Yeah.
You ever heard? So I was playing a cop and Jason was there. And we're walking, and it's this long scene, and I'm, you know, as I'm giving this exposition, we're going down this corridor, we're going around the thing. We go there, we look at the body, and Jason's just listening as we go through the whole time. And so we go. It might be more funny to me. So anyway, go this long scene. We go all the way around. We go to the body. We do the thing, and right when we do it, I finish. I hit the dot, and I look up at Jason, and he's looking at me, and all the crew and everybody's quiet and looking. And he goes, "Yeah." And then whatever. Like, it'll do. I mean, what the fuck? We don't got time to do it again. And it was like, but that little validation of Jason was like, oh, he gave me, it'll work. We'll move on. I was like, that meant a lot to me. That meant a lot to me. And Dinner, the director, like laughed. That was a good moment. So with this production deal that you had, did that give you the juice to do After Dark, My Sweet?
No. I had the deal, and you know, I was trying to find good projects, and I found a couple scripts. They weren't interested in them, and then the new head. Then I'd met Foley, James Foley, director of After Dark, My Sweet, and we'd become friends because he'd seen me in The Beast. Actually, he'd seen The Beast, and he actually probably saw Lost Boys, but he saw The Beast, and he really liked it and wanted to meet with me. So I met with him.
Did you meet with James Foley for this for this purpose, or was it a general?
General. He had a script.
And what has he done up until that point before you first met him?
He had done a movie called Reckless at Close Range, and then he did a Madonna movie, Who's That Girl That Didn't Do Well. So he'd written some script, then wanted to get back to the type of stuff that he'd made, because that Close Range sort of launched him up a little bit with Sean Penn and Walken. And he gave me a script that I read, and he wanted to meet, and we never ended up talking about the script. We just talked about other things, and then we became really good friends. He lived 5 minutes from me, and I mean friends, we saw each other every single day, that kind of friends, buddies. And he's probably 11 years older than me, 10, 12, 11 years older. And one day, another friend of mine, a good friend as a director, someone had given her this script, After Dark, My Sweet. And I read it, and it was okay, not great. And then I gave it to Foley. And then Foley liked it. And what we both did is we went back to the Jim Thompson book, and we read the book. And then we both said, wow, there's something really here. So there was a company called Avenue, which was one of the first independent Avenue Entertainments. They had just done Drugstore Cowboy, and they wanted to work with him. So he brought this script to them, and they liked him, and they liked the idea of the script, but they didn't want me in it, which was, of course, the Hollywood way. And many times that has happened to me. So he said, well, Jason brought it to me, and Jason is going to play the part. So if you want to work with me, I'd like to rewrite this and do it. And got the money, which I think was about $5 million in '89. And he was also very open to me, and with a lot of my ideas from the script and the character. And I read with all the people, and we made that work, you know. And it was one of those, I knew once we sort of had the script that he had, I knew the potential for that character. And in my mind, the dissatisfaction I had with my first movie that made me want to quit, I'd made another bar for myself here that if I couldn't nail this, I'm not going to act anymore either. I was way just putting pressure on myself because I thought,
Jesus Christ, dude, somebody should have taught you how to meditate when you were young. I was just trying to get hammered and party with my friends at 21. Like the kind of pressure that you were putting on yourself.
I did. I put a lot of pressure on me, without question.
Now, was On the Waterfront a inspiration for your character? Was Brando's character an inspiration? You know, being an ex-boxer, certain kind of like a little bit of the mannerisms, or was that kind of something that you pulled from?
I pulled from internally someone who is able to live, embody, and encapsulate a broken person like that. The danger with being influenced is wanting to ape something. And I didn't want to ape or use any things that I found that he did that were effective. I wanted to find an internal motor that was as true. Most people who become boxers because they sort of have to. It's not the glamorous thing that you see on television. No one would really want to go through that. And so that similarity, and I thought that there was a real tenderness in him. But the book had such interesting sort of narrative in it and insight into the mind, which you don't necessarily get in a script. And by the way, it's not a great book, but it's a good enough book that you can make a great movie out of it, which is sometimes better. So yeah, no, I didn't want to do, and this guy was definitely off. He'd been through a lot of stuff. You know, he'd been in institutions. He had electroshock therapy, this character, abused, you know, had killed somebody. And it was just film noir. And once again, talk about interpretation. Here's Foley and I, we're going to make film noir, but we're going to do it in the bright desert sunlight, not in the city, you know, not with Venetian blinds and dark, but just burnt out. So just trying to not be limited by the genre or the tenets or the strictures of film noir. Film noir tends to be a lot of attitude, snappy broads and dames and dialogue. Well, how about replacing that attitude with emotion? Because his character was so emotional. And you could still have the intrigue, and you can still have the harshness and the femme fatale and a fucked up plot that you know is never going to work, but it doesn't even matter about the plot. It's the will you feel for them as they start to go over the cliff. And I just thought that I was ready. You know, I hadn't worked for a couple of years because I didn't like anything out there, and I was ready. And I was, and this was my friend, and I was going to do something with this, and I knew it in my head.
Oh, there was a couple of years between The Beast and this?
Yeah, probably 2.
Oh, wow.
There was a lot of
And
time I could go a year or two without working. Yeah.
is there a with the paper bag that your character carries in the film? Was that in the books, or was that
No,
your choice?
it was my
or
choice. Yeah.
That's a phenomenal. I mean, if you think about the little details, because you learn so much about somebody when you see all their belongings, everything that holds dear to them in a fucking paper bag, and because were you initially just supposed to be in the desert with nothing?
Right.
Wow, that's really interesting.
But there's that. You never know what's in there, but it's all he's got, and just the visual image of someone clasping that as they walk. That means a lot. That goes back to what I was talking about putting as much information into a frame as you can without having to say anything. And you don't need to look at that bag because you know what it means to him. And it evokes an emotion in you right away, even if you're questioning.
Yeah.
And to be able to do that without exposition
it gives me the same, because I know exactly what you're talking about right now. And it really gave me that same sense that, did you ever see the movie The Verdict?
Yeah.
With Paul Newman. There's a scene there where he's sitting in an office and he's got a little briefcase in his lap and he's clutching it like it's a life preserver. And you never see what's in that briefcase. He's a lawyer. It's whatever his lawyer shit is. And it's that sense of grinding a person down to this is all they've got left. Is they've got this little tiny thing that they're hanging on to and everything that matters is in there. It's a great way to sort of indicate a person at the end of their rope, at the end of the line. This is it. He's boiled down to this.
And you really need you need a partner and a filmmaker that understands what you're trying to do so they can capture it. And I remember talking to Foley a lot about it. He said, I really want to fill this with real behavior and real physicality. I mean, Wes knows I'm very physical and I'll prepare for my things physically because you want to be able to use your body. And there's a lot of long shots, and Foley rarely has me in a medium shot unless you see the bottom of my hands because you want to see this guy's mitts. This is what he used to fight with. This is what he protects himself with. These are the things that are also he's trying to be gentle with her. Very important to get these things in there. It's very important to get them in there. It's sometimes the accruement of all those little shots that you'll feel something in the end when that part of your body changes. But you have to have all those things in there. Even the way that guy walks, there's a little bounce to his step. You could tell he may have been a boxer, an athlete, but there's also a wounded quality that there's a little protectiveness because he's sleeping in the streets or when he was in asylums and things like that. And I didn't want him just to be someone who's stumbling around. He may not know where he's going, but he's getting there. And so there was a purpose to the walking and the thing where he was. And as the movie went on, his body raised up more as he became more into himself, and there was a straightening, and there was a more a directness and an economy of thought, because he'd never had the opportunity to have someone like this in this way. So I just thought that everything was there to do that, and I was able to do what I wanted, and certainly more than any other movie after that movie, I certainly had a lot of freedom to do things.
And how much long after till you did Rush?
That was my next movie. So
and did you take another 2 years?
I didn't, because Lily Zanuck and her husband Richard Zanuck, and famous producer, they were going to see another movie at some Cineplex. They couldn't get in, and then a friend had just come in After Dark, My Sweet, and they said, you got to go see this movie. So they went in to go see that movie. And once again, After Dark, My Sweet is a very good movie. Roger Ebert has it as one of his 100 best American movies, and I believe it really is that good. But it wasn't successful. Most of my movies haven't been. It was critically very successful, as was Rush, but neither of them made money. But so they came to me and then wanted me to do that movie, which I did turn down again as well. Rush.
Wait, Rush didn't make money?
Nope. Rush was
it because of the soundtrack was so well known, or? I remember that movie everywhere.
I think it was because of the soundtrack, but also a lot of those movies, or I could just say the movies that I've done, they grew in stature through DVD and things like that, and people discovering them.
Yeah,
because people talk about an independent movie. I was making those so-called independent movies before they were coined independent movies. Mine were just small, unsuccessful movies.
Hey, Wes, I gotta tell my story about Rush. Though.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, this is and please give me some rope here because this might take a minute. But so when Rush came out, I didn't see it at the theater, but
you weren't alone.
My friends and I, we're a bunch of dumbass late teens, early 20s. The thing we loved was we loved Die Hard. We loved Lethal Weapon. We loved Predator, right? That we loved action movies, and I still do. But that was it. So we'd go to the video store. Remember, I don't know if there's this thing called video stores. I don't know if you remember those, but we would go to the video store, and there'd be all the boxes. And what you would do is you wandered the shelves looking for something that looked the most like Die Hard. A dude on the cover with a gun, right? That was what you were looking for. And what you wanted was there's going to be a bunch of shootouts. There's going to be a bunch of fights. There's probably an explosion or two. And you can hang out with your buddies and drink beer and have a good time. And one of those visits we're going through and we find Rush. And there's this moment of like, oh, I haven't heard of this, but I remember that dude. He was from Lost Boys, and Jennifer Jason Leigh, she's hot. And there's a gun on the cover, right? So we're like, oh, hey, let's get this one. So we get it. We watch it. And I remember we got to the end and I'm fucking blown away. Like it hit me like it shook me to the core, this movie, right? And I turn around and look, and all of my friends are just like, they're like, one of them's reading a comic book. The other one's like, like they would all have been on their phones if it wasn't, if there was the day of phones. And I remember this moment of like, how did they not see that this was like fucking amazing? And it was the first moment where I realized that, yes, I do love action movies, but what I actually like is stories. And that story hit me like a ton of bricks. And it hit me just as much as just as effectively as like a great sci-fi movie or a great action movie would have. Like it had the same effect on me. And I give that movie a lot of credit for being the thing that pushed me out of being an idiot who only watches Die Hard knockoffs to being somebody who actually just looks for great stories in movies because they have just as much impact, for me. And it's weird that movie sort of was one of those movies that like I feel like helped mature my tastes in movies. Like I suddenly realized that my buddies who only wanted to watch Die Hard knockoffs, we didn't have exactly the same tastes. We didn't love just the same movies. And it was a big deal for me. I watch that movie probably every couple of years. I have a great deal of fondness for it, and I think it did affect how I see storytelling.
Oh, well, that's a nice compliment. I'm glad it does. I mean, because there's no question that, I mean, I honestly don't make movies to change the world. Or people say that I don't. I do it to find, as I said, some part of me at some point that can transfer this idea, someone else's idea, and that would move somebody. And the way to do that is to be behaviorally real. And someone's going to identify with it, or someone's going to be moved by it, or it changes someone in a little bit of way. I wanted, make the movies that I was affected by. In the same way you say you were affected by that, there were movies that I was when I was younger, and I sought to try to make those type movies. So,
well, that one worked on me, man.
Good.
When Raynor gets, spoiler alert, when Raynor gets shot and she's wrapping the belt around his leg, and because I had seen Lethal Weapon and Die Hard and all those movies, well, of course he's going to live.
Right.
Like they'll save him. He's going to live. It'll be a harsh lesson he had to learn, but he'll pull through. And what happens there, like I was not ready for it. I was so not ready for that moment. And I'd become so engaged with those two characters and their journey and their story that it just hit me in the gut like a sucker punch. And it really did change how I see stories. That was a big one for me.
I love how it does end like that and doesn't end at the same time. And I think because that's what life is, man. It just happens quick, and there's no setup, and there's no necessarily any resurrection or retribution. It happens, boom. And partially that's why that movie was not successful, because we don't want movies like that. You want movies where you see everyone go through it, and then one of them goes, but you're prepared for that person to go, and then the other person comes on, or they all make it through, or the bad guys get punished. And, that movie's not like that.
Well, I mean, he does get shotgunned in the face later, but
right. But but a lot of these movies, when they came out, once again, I said I'm 24 and I'm 23 when I do After Dark, my suite, and people are watching John Hughes movies. Those movies come out today. I think it's a different thing. I think people are prepared for them now. Young actors, I grew a beard at 24. The studio didn't want me to grow a beard. I said, well, I got to grow a beard, man. I mean, it's just the way it's going to be. But now, of course, everybody does that. That's what you do if you want an Oscar. Grow a beard and do this, that, you know.
Well, this is my Oscar beard.
Well, you got to keep it going, man.
Yeah.
Wait, that's horse shit. I've been growing a beard for all 7 years. I was doing The Expanse. I didn't win no goddamn. I didn't win no Emmy or Oscar.
You're on the way.
They lied to me.
I got one other Rush story I got to tell that affected how I tell stories now. Is the version of me before that was, you know, a threatening scene is 2 guys pointing guns at each other, right? Or 4 guys pointing guns at each other. That was a tense scene. That movie has a scene where Raynor and what's Jennifer's character's name in that? I forget now.
Kristen.
Shit. Anyway,
maybe.
Yeah. So where the 2 of you are meeting with the heroin dealer, and it's the scene of nobody leaves here unless they shoot up.
Yeah.
Right. And he has a gun. He's just sort of holding it in his lap. And that scene was one of the most tense scenes. One of the most, like, it felt like this horrible sense of danger and threat to everything. And it wasn't just that he might shoot you. It's that now you're going to be forced to do something you didn't want to do. Well, her character, right? That she had told herself she could get away with it. She told herself she could dance on the edge of the line without ever actually crossing it. And this moment of, if I'm going to do this thing, I'm going to have to cross the line I said I would never cross. When I write something now, I am consciously looking for those scenes where the person has told themselves that they're not going to cross this line, and you push them right up to the edge of it, and you give them that moment where it's make or break now. Are you going to cross the line you said you would never cross and accomplish the thing you want to accomplish, or are you going to back all the way out of this and leave unsuccessful? I love those moments, and I think that may be one of those first moments that really hit me that way, because it was part of, you know, my education about good storytelling, but that was a big moment for me, like that scene, because they're not pointing guns at each other. There's no, you know, it's not a gunfight. It is a battle of wills, and it is a battle of commitment for her. How committed is she to the thing she's trying to do? And will she cross all the moral lines she thought she wouldn't ever cross in her commitment to accomplish this thing? It's one of my favorite scenes in movies.
Yeah.
The Expanse is full of those moments.
Yeah, well, there's a reason.
Ripping off Rush. You know, Jason, the mythology, I want to talk a little bit about your preparation for Rush, because the mythology of Rush, which I always thought was way more interesting than what the truth is. But the mythology is that you were doing those drugs to get a sense of the part, to go into that darkness and feel it so you can do the role. But I talked to you and you're like, no, man, I didn't do drugs at all. Like I was actually, you know, one of the healthiest times of my life. I was, you know, eating as clean as I could possibly eat to lose the weight, to have that look and you were really injecting in the scenes, but you were injecting water. And I was like, wait, you didn't do drugs at all? You're like, nah, man, I didn't. I was like, wow, it was a way cooler story where you just locked yourself in a hotel room and do drugs for a couple of months and then come out and do the role.
You know, for me, is a couple things. Once again, it's why are you doing what you do? There's the ultimate performance that's there. That's the result. That's an aspect of it. But that result is largely out of your hands. It's what people decide to feel on their own, whether they like it or not. But the other thing, to me, personally, the only thing that we really have on our own lives are degree of difficulty. And so for me, the challenge was, especially coming off After Dark, My Sweet, where I thought that I took that character to all the places it can go, and that character was so different from me, that I want to play this guy in a realistic way that there has not been on film yet. And you've never seen drugs in this way. And no one had done that, I thought. I thought that Panic in Needle Park came pretty close to it, and I liked a lot of that. But I said, I want to go another level with it. And so, like divers, that you can do a good dive, but you know your score goes up if the degree of difficulty is higher when you're trying to attempt. And so I always thought that for my own movement as a person, for my own advancement, I want to be able to do that and not just have the result. Because you can get fucked up and they can capture it. And there's a lot of actors, a lot of famous actors who have been fucked up, and you capture enough of it and edit together, and it's affecting. There's no question about that. But they're fucked up, and I don't want to do that. I wanted to make people believe I absolutely was. But little did they know I was up at 5 a.m, running 6 miles, to get down to 160 pounds. So no, but I did get a big reputation in this town, and I think it still exists 30 years later as being a drug addict, and because of that, and because also I refuse to go out and then invite you into my living room on People magazine and say, "Hey, everybody, this is how I really am, and this is my girlfriend, and look at our little pooch, and isn't everything so nice?" I always left I always left that palette, and people painted it the way they wanted to, because initially I was moved by actors that you knew about them through their roles, and that's what I wanted. I didn't want to waste any of that, and just fluff. Now the business is 1,000% different now, so you really can't do that. But at that time, you still could.
Now, is that a habit that you started, the getting up at 5 a.m.? Because I remember when we worked on Powers, no matter how early the call time, no matter how hard we went in the paint the night before, you would always get that call at 5 a.m. and we would go run. We'd had those great runs through Chicago and on the boardwalk,
and then through all the steps and then to all the steps in the hotel after.
Yeah, and then do the steps to the hotel, and then when you go to work, you get this buzz, right. This clarity of mind. And is that something you learned early on, or was it with Rush or whatever, to really get your gears turning and your mind turning? And you fast a lot of the times. You don't eat when you're working. Yeah. Is that?
Well, the working out and all that, you just you gotta clear your head. You got to get your body getting ready, as I said, to use all. If you're sluggish, sometimes it's just a shrug of a shoulder that you can say something with. But if you're really sluggish, you don't have your body. You don't have that reflex. And I don't like to eat when I'm on stage or I'm on Broadway. If we go up at 8 o'clock, I never eat past 12 ever. So, I don't eat again until nighttime, because I want to be hungry. Because as an animals' senses are most attuned when they're hungry, because they're going to die. They smell better, they see better, they think better, they hear better, because naturally we as predators need all those things to find food. So I, very young, after reading stuff like that and also knowing my own body, that's how I like to go to work, hungry. Because I'm going to listen more. My body is going to be more attuned to stimuli, just like an animal's is because he's hungry. And it makes a big difference.
I skip eating a lot, and it doesn't help me.
It'll help you if you have to do a walk and talk with Wes. Trust me.
That was I still remember that moment. Yeah, it'll do. And then go to the next one. How did Sleepers come about? And did you was it a long period of not working? And now I know that, so I'm reading this book right now about John Ford and John Wayne. I actually wanted to ask you about this. And John Ford was talking about, he taught John Wayne to constantly be working, to keep working. And I think that because I think John Wayne got to the level where he was able to do Searchers. But what John Wayne said is that if I take time off of working, it's like every new movie, I feel like I'm starting fresh again. So in terms, if I keep working, if I keep training that mechanism, I keep showing them a set and I get comfortable on set, that's now out of the way where I can constantly work, because he wasn't a natural actor. He wasn't a naturally gifted actor, and he had to really work for it. But he started doing some interesting stuff later in his life. Now, you tend to take a lot of time off in between projects, and a lot of it is because there's a lot of things you don't want to do. Mm-hmm. Are there ever moments where you're like, I just want to work, even if I don't think this is really, because for me, working is so much fun. Even the experience off the camera, is such a good time, and I feel I am better when I'm working. I'm better when I'm moving. I'm better if I have to get up at 5 a.m. If I have challenges, and if I have a creative expression, I feel like I'm a better human being, a better person. Do you ever feel as if, are you making this conscious choice to do what you want to do because you like that pattern of living? Or like, do you ever feel like you just want to work?
I mean, look, it's different phases of your life. When I was making those decisions not to work, I had the opportunity to work, and I just turned a lot of them down, and I chose to do work that I wanted to do, and some of it was good, some of it was okay. Some of it didn't work, but I made those choices. But it's very different when you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, and now 50s. I mean, I don't have the opportunities that I used to have because I turned work down for so many years that I didn't achieve a certain status and recognizability that other people did. So if I look back, should I have worked more? Yeah, I guess so. There's not lots of things I look at that I should have done, but I could have possibly created more. But I must say, when you do the kind of things I did by the time I was 30, I really done a lot of the stuff I wanted to do, and movies started to change for the worse. And they're getting very boring and formulaic and bigger and computerized. So I was trying to find my place in it. But it always went back to where am I in my life. So I was just trying to live my life, meeting different people, having relationships, reading, understanding, my place. And then when a movie came, if it was something that, oh yeah, that this will work for this right now, then I would do it. But yeah, I don't know. It is starting for the beginning for me. And I got to say, it's always been hard for me. I think I've been successful and I've achieved in certain things, but it's not easy for me to do. Not to the level that I go to. I mean, I think I've told you this before, but there's no way that I would be able to do Rush today. No way. I think maybe my technique's a little better in certain things, but I could never do that for 4 months now. I couldn't. I have a son. There's a selfishness and an element of unknown witchcraft that comes with doing what you do at that level. I mean, it is no accident that if you look at the great actors, that a very high percentage of them have disastrous personal lives, disastrous familial lives. And I never wanted that. And that's why one of the reasons I think I waited so many years to have kids, because I was not going to put them through something like that. And so now, at my age, it's what can I do? I think I have a lot of life experience to bring stuff. I always have to play older, when I was in 20s and do things that other people weren't doing. I have that life experience now. But the business has changed radically. So frankly, I don't know. I don't know. But I did not, when I was younger, think, oh, I got to work. It's fun. To me, it was, whoa, this is going to be a big hill to climb, whatever it was I was doing.
Ty, do you feel that way about writing? Do you feel that you need to be it's better for you to be consistent, or do you like to take times off?
I am the laziest person who's ever lived, so I love to take huge amounts of time off. I'm racing toward an early retirement where I plan to just not do anything useful ever again. But I have great respect for people who are driven to work. Like I don't feel like I'm better than them. I don't feel like I'm a superior human because I don't do that. I think the world exists because people are willing to step up and do the hard work. I just like to ride their coattails and, just coast.
I will say, Ty, a lot of people say that they want to retire and just do nothing, and I don't really believe them. I believe you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
You are very good at doing nothing. It's a talent. It's a skill. I remember thinking, or what I'm thinking now is that if Ty just disappears one day, we're all going to know. We're going to all right, he hit that dollar amount that he was trying to get to, and we might as well delete his number.
I do want to talk about Sleepers a little bit, though, because if I don't want to not talk about that movie, because that's another one that one of your films, Jason, that I really have always liked, I think, more than its general acceptance, I think. I've always had a higher opinion of it than that. Because I know a lot of people like Sleepers, but I don't think it was ever like the gigantic mega hit that cast, you would think that cast would have, because the cast is astonishing. I mean, look at the cast of that film. It's amazing. But I was one of those knuckleheads. I was the kid who would have pushed a hot dog cart down the stairs. I was that guy. And the fact that I didn't wind up in a lot of trouble and completely fuck up my life early on still seems like an astonishing coincidence to me. Like there's like if I lived with the same exact life 1,000 times, I think in 900 of them I'm in jail. So I really, when I saw the movie, I really connected with those kids going, oh man, that would have been me. I would have fucked up. And then all the things that play out after that, because of that, felt very personal. Like I almost like I was watching a version of me that could have existed and didn't. And so I think I connected more personally with that movie than maybe some people did. but it's another one I've seen a number of times. And the only disappointing thing about that movie to me, getting to talk to you right now, is that you didn't get to do any scenes with Wendell Pierce. And I fucking love Wendell Pierce. Did you get to meet him while you were on the film? Yeah. Well, I'm a huge Wire fan. And of course he played the Bunk, one of the greatest characters in the history of television. But yeah, but that's actually, that's one of those movies that, I can watch it over and over. I don't watch it every day, but I have watched it multiple times and pick something up new, because when you get that many great performers in a movie, the thing you're talking about, where you try to find something new, you try to find something that's not obvious to bring to the part. You're trying to not do the most obvious version of the character. That cast is filled with people who have that level of chops, and they're all doing that. They're all trying to bring something to the character that is not obvious. And so there's a lot of subtlety to that movie that if you're really into performance, if you're really into how people choose to tell stories with performance, there's a lot of meat on those bones to chew on, man.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff, and Levinson is a good filmmaker, and he's good at these sprawling tales. I think the difficult thing about it, I think the relationships work. And once again, I'm one of those guys in that part. I got to be working with everybody. It was the first time I got to film in New York, and I'm from New York. I think at the heart of it, I wondered if the story was true, because the guy talked so much about it being true, and that became such a big deal. And I don't think it did happen.
No.
At all.
I don't think it did either.
But I think that the actors in it, and the way that they, as you said, everyone's not underplaying, but they're playing against what you'd expect to happen in something like that. And just seeing all those different generations of people, I think, made an interesting story.
I want to be respectful of your time, Jason, and I want to bring it back and end it with your revival of the championship season. I have so much more I want to talk to you about. But before we get to that championship season, mm-hmm. I want to talk about your friends and neighbors, mm-hmm. and I want to talk about. I think is that the first film that you had that kind of control over the production of you produced it, and so what you did in terms of rehearsing, I mean, I think that's a dream situation. And I don't know if I've ever, I mean, I know that reading Kazan on directing and how he always had the 3-week rehearsal before you go into it. And Paul Newman always demanded that. But in recent history, I've never heard of this existing for films. And how did that process start? And was it something that you had to get the actors to agree to without getting paid, or how did it work out? How did you create that environment for rehearsing for the movie?
Well, when I met Neil, I mean, he's a playwright, and I said this dialogue is very good. The way that we're going to get around it sounding like a play is we have to have these characters down. And I wanted to do stuff, and I told the actors that I want to create the best working situation for an actor. Now I'm totally in control, so I want a situation that I'd want it to be, that I'd want to work in. And part of that was with a lot of these scenes, we're going to do them in long takes or oneers, so we're not leaving it in the hands of an editor or a director. And I'd say that right in front of Neil. But we can control the rhythms, and you can control the body movements, all these little things that if we put the work in, but it's going to take work. And so I scheduled it 4 weeks of rehearsal, I think. It was 3 or 4 weeks, 5 days a week, not 10 in the morning till 5 at night. It culminated with a 3-day retreat in Arrowhead, where just the actors, and we got a house and Neil LaBute. But the actors that we hired them letting them know that there is going to be this rehearsal process. And it's going to be hard, but ultimately it's going to serve you as an actor, because you're going to be able to control these characters, because that's what I want to do. So that was the way we were going to do it. And I think that the material and the writing lent itself to that. I mean, one of the interesting things in that movie is, and you may know, you may not, there's these 5 characters or 6 characters, however they are. Never once is someone's name mentioned, ever, in the entire movie. Now, that was intentional. And part of that's because how many times do you see a movie where they go, well, Mary, why, Mary, where did, well, because Greg told me. Yes, it's Tom. Mary. People don't talk that way. We've only said each other's names in this amount of time once or twice. It doesn't happen. But Neil specifically, because he wanted them to be specific, but also not. Well, it's very hard to do that kind of dialogue and that amount of dialogue without mentioning a name, without it sounding stilted or sounding like a stunt. But if you watch the movie again, it does sound natural. And it sounds natural because we rehearsed it. And it sounds natural because you believe those two are married and that this friend knows this guy in this way and that way and physically how they react amongst. So there's no exteriors at all in the whole movie. There's no inserts of anything in the whole movie. So there's a lot of things that we wanted to break the sort of standardized rules of narrative or information. And the way you were going to get that information was through these characters, not just through the dialogue, but through their behavior, through their body, through their pauses. The only way to do that is to discover those people through long rehearsals and understand who they are, understand what works, what doesn't work, and then capture it with the camera and the camera understanding it because we'd worked it and worked it and worked it. So the only scene in that whole movie that was never rehearsed was the steam room scene. And that I just the night before learned, or 2 nights before on my own, and then everybody came in and we did it. Okay,
so I wanted to talk about that. And if anybody's listening to this that is interested in the craft of acting, what you can do is you take, so Neil LaBute, and it's been a long time since you've, studying acting, but Jason, but Neil LaBute is like he's very popular in acting classes. People, take his monologues, and I've seen Neil LaBute over and over. I've done Neil LaBute on stage over and over. But you can go on YouTube and you Google that monologue from Friends and Neighbors, and you watch that. Then you Google other people doing that monologue in classes, and you see the level and understanding and the interpretation that Jason gets to, because this is think about the story and think about what it is that you're describing to people. And it takes artistry to pull it off in the way that you've done. And if you really want to get a sense of levels and the difference between skill levels between actors, watch that and watch the one before. I said this before once and I got it wrong, because every now and then what I'll do is I YouTube the speech in Heat with De Niro and Pacino. And also that same exact speech is the word for word is in Live and Die in L.A.
No, it's in L.A. Takedown.
No? Is
no,
LA Takedown?
It's LA Takedown.
Okay, it's LA. Yeah, so I made that same mistake last time, and I just made it again. It's LA Takedown. So you can YouTube this speech between De Niro and Pacino in LA Takedown, and it's the exact same word. But when you see Pacino and when you see De Niro, and I think Heat's one of their last big, great movies, but you see the levels of work that they're doing there. You see why they are what they are, why they're doing the things that they are. And so when you did that monologue, did you and Neil, did you say, just let me sit down with it, just leave me alone, and you just show up, and that's what you did? And then how many takes did you do for that? Because there's no cutaway. It's going straight in the whole time on the monologue, and there's no cuts, there's no anything, in between. So how did that work?
Well, it always goes back to the text and the story. And if something's really great, then you don't want to change it. And I mean, I was word for word perfect on it, which I believe you should be on anything. I mean, when you rehearse something, you rehearse it. I'm not one of those guys who likes to add a bunch of yeah, ums and buts. That's usually making you the character, you the actor, comfortable, but it's not the character. And you know what? I don't want to see you comfortable. That's boring. I want to see that. I want to see the character. So with Neil, he writes in a very specific vernacular, almost a pentameter. Mamet does somewhat, and Shakespeare has his own rhythm. So does Neil, and you really have to get it totally down. But I told him, I said, this monologue is. I don't know how I'm going to do it, because it's just. I don't think there's anything. There's never been anything like it. But I know one thing for sure: it has to be one shot. I said, I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'm telling you, it has to be one shot. So we'll build the steam room and just we'll put a dolly and just dolly, start it where you want it, and you stand up on my face. Yeah, we never talked about even Neil and I rehearsing it or any notes or anything. By that point, we'd been going for a while. And the truth is, as producer, I was just struggling to make sure we got everybody getting their stuff. I was producing, a real producer there every day, doing everything, talking with Neil. He hadn't really directed a movie before. His first movie was like a home movie. And so usually we did my stuff, all my coverage was usually done at the end of the day, or I had to do all my stuff in my apartment. And it was fine. What it did is it forced a certain economy and precision of the character because I didn't have time to be fucking around. But when we did that, I just worked on it on my own. I think the night before I really got it down, but maybe 2 nights.
Do you remember some of your thoughts and how you approached that monologue and some things that you really like and how specific you were with the tone? Do you remember any of the work that you did, the specific work that you did on that monologue?
Someone had given me, and I lost it, this piece of paper about expressing certain things in acting. And it helped with a monologue that, for a piece of dialogue, for example, as I say this line, am I recalling something? Am I trying to prove something? Am I confused about something? Am I digging for something? Am I reliving something? So making it into an active sort of verb. And so I went down and I broke down the monologue and I messed with different areas of putting those verbs with each sort of area or section of the writing. Was this a reminiscence? Was this part of regret? But making it live and when it was happening. And so then once I memorized it all, it wasn't going through trying to find the peaks and valleys. It was making certain choices with certain portions of the story. And then I just rolled with it, man. And, we did it, I think we did 8 takes or 9 takes or something. But also Neil wanted to do at that point, he said, I want the longest uncut monologue in American film. I said, all right, well, we'll give it a shot.
But that's a huge thing. I think that's one of the things that an actor learns that really breaks them through is how to be active, that in life, there's all these things, these macro things and micro things that we want, that we're always trying, and everything we say is active. There's an intention behind it. You're trying to accomplish something. You're seeing the effect that it's having, and that might change your strategy in the moment of doing that. And that simple lesson it changes somebody when they're, we've all seen it, the emoting, or there's like this a general idea of a feeling that they're in or whatever. We're never aware of the feelings we're in. We're trying to accomplish something. We're trying to get something. Yeah. And those feelings go through.
And I'll tell you, I haven't been a filmmaker as long as you guys have. I've only been doing this about 7 years. But after 7 years of making film and looking at actors and watching people perform, the people who came in and they just memorized the words, the camera spots immediately. Like you are immediately exposed as a fraud if all you did was memorize words and come in and spout them in front of the camera. Mm-hmm. Because all of the stuff we expect to see in other humans, exactly the things you're talking about, the emotion, the intention, all of those things that people have automatically when they speak, that's all gone now. And you've just got a loudspeaker saying words at the camera. It never works. It's so easily spotted, and it's always just comes across as bullshit.
And you have to. I remember very early on as a young actor, because people, why are you argumentative? I said, I'm not being argumentative. There's 2 things. If I have a disagreement with the director on how to do something, it's for 2 reasons that we're talking. Number 1, I disagree with you. I think that I know a better way to do it, or at least I have a way to access myself to do it. Or 2, I don't understand where you're coming from. So you're going to have to explain it to me so I can find a way to get into this. Because instinctually, I always had a very good ear and a good sort of gut for what was true and what needed to be done. And I was too young and a lot of those other things to necessarily have that experience, but I just knew. I knew when things were not right and needed to be changed. There's a lot changed in After Dark. There's a lot changed in Rush that we hit the set. And certain scenes are not like written at all. And I can't explain it right now because I'm 24, but I know something's not right here. Let me just figure it out. and things would change. But I remember an anecdote reading an article that affected me a lot as an actor of Brando talking about On the Waterfront. The famous scene in the back of the cab when Charlie pulls the gun on Brando and says, well, you better come up with an answer before we, make it to 344 Green Street or whatever it is. Brando argued with Schulberg, the writer, and Kazan. He said, I don't believe that a brother is going to pull a gun on a brother. I don't believe it. It's total bullshit. And he didn't want to do it. And there was huge arguments and back and forth, and Schulberg wanted to stay and blah, 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 and Kazan wanted to do it. And they said, well, it's going to stay and you got to play it. So the scene goes, blah, blah, blah. I could have been somebody, could have been blah, blah, blah. Well, you better get, then he pulls the gun. You can YouTube it after this. Watch Brando's reaction when the gun is pulled to him. He reacts like, I don't believe you'd pull a gun on me. And so his gut, instead than playing it like everybody did in the 50s, oh my, why are you pulling a gun? He looks at him and there's a sadness in his eyes. And he says, Charlie. And he just takes his fingers and just pushes the gun away as if it didn't exist, because you're not going to pull a gun on me. What are you, crazy? So we often want to get rid of things that we're uncomfortable with, and we may be right. Instinctually, there's something wrong with this. But sometimes that impediment, that obstacle will be the key to the whole scene. And in that scene, that makes the whole thing. Brando didn't believe that a brother would pull a gun on him. How does he play it? Terry Malloy says, I don't believe you're pulling a gun on me. And that's how he does it. So,
and I'll tell you what, as a writer, I've had those conversations, and my favorite version of that conversation is where the actor says, I don't understand what you're trying to get me to do here. Can we talk about it? Can you explain it to me? That is because it's respectful, and it's what you end in the best place, because sometimes what they don't understand is you didn't do it right. And that can come out of the conversation too. And that's okay to change your stuff. But starting from that place of, I don't get it, I don't understand it, because sometimes you'll be able to explain it and then they will get it. And sometimes you start to explain it, you go, oh, the reason you don't understand is because I fucked it up. I wrote it wrong. Let me fix this. But that's it. The best work comes out of that interaction. So I'm never offended by that as a writer. That never hurts my feelings. Wes does it to me all the time. Never hurts my feelings.
and I'm going to get the blame. I'm going to get the blame for this now.
I want to talk a little bit about. Do you have a little bit of time, Jason?
Yeah.
We'll briefly talk about Narc, just because I can't pass up Narc, and then we'll get to that championship season. But we'll be brief. But first of all, now how long have you worked before you did Narc? What was the gap of work? And this part's interesting to me because I'm seeing the level of performances you're doing, but you're doing it with time off. I think that if somebody's a basketball player, a great basketball player, how great are they going to be if they're taking time off between games?
By the way, it's a fair question. It's a fair question.
Yeah. And how do you get to that point? I mean, to be where you are at Narc. And so how did that process happen? Did you read the script? How did you know? Okay,
that's another interesting story, but I hadn't worked for 3 years probably when I did Narc. I had done Your Friends and Neighbors, and it was such an immersive process, finding the piece, casting it, acting in it, editing with Neil, promoting it all over the place, the movie coming out. It was wonderful. It's not like I was tired. It's just I wasn't going to then make something that wasn't on that sort of level of commitment and worth and who I was as a person at the time. So I didn't find anything. And then a year went by, and then 2 years and 3 years. And, I'm not in the public eye anymore, so no one could give a shit. And I'd done some pretty good movies, back to back to back, but no one cared. So this script came, and I read it, and I thought it was kind of interesting. And I saw Carnahan's first movie, The Blood, Guts, and Full Octane, or High Octane, or whatever it is. And I thought that he had something to say. And so my agents got me that, and this is a true story. So they wanted me to meet him, and I said, okay. And then it turns out the company that was making Narc didn't want me to be in it. And this is a true story. They wanted either John Bon Jovi or Stephen Baldwin. That's what I was told. And I was told because at the time they had more videos on the shelf than I did. Now, this is one of the reasons I don't work for 3 years, because of how fucking ridiculous the business is, that some piece of shit little company that had never even really made a movie is now telling me something like that after I had just done Your Friends and Neighbors. So I remember hearing that Carnahan said, well, look, I'm going to meet with Jason if he'll meet with me. So, fuck you. And so that got relayed to me from my agent. So I said, all right, well, if that guy's sticking up for me like that, I'm at least going to sit down and talk to him. And then I sat down and met him, and I liked his passion and his ideas and all that stuff, and then decided to do the movie. It was a very low budget. And then what was happening when we were making the movie is that after about, I don't know, a week or 10 days, I wasn't getting any checks. And it turns out no one was getting paid. So I called my people and they said, yeah, it turns out that they are out of money. I mean, they have enough money to keep shooting, but I don't think you're going to get paid. So don't go to work Monday. And we'll just, if they don't pay, blah, blah. I said, whoa, wait a minute. I said, this is the kind of movie that if it misses one day, it's going to shut down. You're not going to make it back. And I liked this guy Carnahan at the time, writer, director. And, when your first movie goes down, no one cares why it went down. You're the director of a movie that went down, And I said, I think that would irreparably hurt him one way or the other. So I stayed on, and I wasn't getting paid, and Liotta wasn't getting paid, and this was pre-digital. So the vendors weren't getting paid, so we couldn't even see dailies. So we were sort of shooting blind there and just going through it the whole time. And it was one of those things where I knew the work was good and it was interesting and it was very hard. And then it all just sort of came together, man. I ended up suing them and getting double what they were supposed to pay me. And they put the movie together. And I think that is one of the movies that really holds up as well. I mean, if it's ever on TV, you watch a piece of it, it's very well shot. Liotta is very good. The whole thing works.
The opening scene where you tear out of there. How was that, like you running through the neighborhood?
Well, it was really hard.
How long was that?
Well, it always makes me laugh because they talk about, when you read about that, and just stunning in the beginning and the filming and Carnahan and this and that. They forget someone's got to run that. Someone's got to run that 32 times, not once, 32 times. And we had talked about it, that we wanted a foot chase that would be similar to maybe the car chase in The French Connection, something that is just visceral, heart pounding. You don't know what's going on. And I had torn this, I had this sports hernia surgery a couple months before we started filming. And because I torn these abdominal muscles. So I got this major surgery, and I went to this doctor who's the top guy who does the football players and all. And I said, look, we did it like a season on this date. They scheduled that to the end of the movie, the run, which is the beginning. I said, I have to be able to do that by this point. So I would be getting up at 5 a.m. in the cold, and rehabbing with the person and running and strengthening, having the scar tissue break down. But even though when I see the movie, the way I walk is very different, because I'm rehabbing. And then we get to the last few days of the film where we shot that, freezing cold. And the first bit, we kept doing the steady cams, but they couldn't keep up with me. We kept, tried dolly, none of it worked. So they strapped a combat camera on a stuntman and made a little bit of a pathway. So that first bit of running, when I bash out and jump over a fence and go over the ice and then go through into the wall is not even a cameraman. It's a stuntman just trying to keep up with the combat cam. But the thing about when you do that, as I said, people don't realize you can do that once or twice and get lucky, but you're gonna slip on something. You can't keep jumping over things. You can't keep jumping over a fence. You can't keep running on ice. Yep. You can't do that. It was just, and I was so unsteady anyway. But I do think it's a great, great, great opening. Because that could be a short film if you wanted, for that 2 minutes, and they say, holy fuck. So I think
Did Carnahan write that?
Yeah, mm-hmm. But he was also very open to things. I mean, the original script is a lot different from what the movie was. You start filming things, you don't need this. What about this? You try that. It was the right thing. Him at that time, Liotta at that time, and me at that time. Even though it had been 3 years, I've been going through some other stuff in my life, and blah, and I thought, wow. Sort of raw for this moment right now. I said, just give it a shot.
Now, when did you get the idea And when did you feel like it was the right time to bring championship season to do a revival of it in New York?
There's another story. The director, Gregory Mosher, was coming off a big hit. He had done View from the Bridge with Liev Schreiber and Scarlett Johansson. And his next play, he wanted to do that championship season because he always loved it. He saw it when he was a kid. So he called the agent that represented the play, and he said, well, you're going to have to meet with Jason Patric. And he said, why? Because he's actually Jason Miller's son and controls the play. So I met with Mosher. So once again, I was a must hire. I wouldn't have been hired in that. It was, we started talking about it and, what he wanted to do with it. And I really liked his take. And then, he had to put me in it.
How did you get the cast? You got Brian Cox. Well, Kiefer's your friend.
Yeah, but I hadn't talked. Kiefer's my friend, but I hadn't talked to him, and I hadn't seen him but once in 20 years or something. I let them do their way first, Mosher and all the casting directors, and they'd go into this person, that person. It was taking months and driving me crazy because I don't work that way. And finally, I just said, enough. And I won't even mention the people they went to. But then I said, what if we got Kiefer? And honestly, I sent it to Kiefer, FedExed it to him. He got it on a Monday, and he called me at 11:30 and he said, who do you want me to play? And because he just finished 24, he wanted to do something different. And then I knew Noth a little bit through the Don, and he was dying to get into it. Both Mosher and I wanted Brian Cox. So once we had him and then Kiefer, and the meeting went pretty quickly. And then the casting director, she suggested Gaffigan, because at that point, none of us really knew who Gaffigan was, Jim Gaffigan.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it was great. It was just, it's eight shows a week. And we really did it like the old guys. I mean, we were out, 3 or 4 of us every night. Night. It was one of those things where we wondered who was going to be able to show up the next morning, for work.
And I met Noth through you a couple of times, and I remember being over there and you guys talking about it. Was you telling me that it was one of the greatest work experiences that you ever had?
Oh, yeah.
It was one of the most fun.
You got to be a real athlete. You got to be an athlete to do 2 shows on a Wednesday, two on a Saturday, and do Sunday, and 3 hours of that kind of emotional stuff, and guys pounding back and forth at each other, and then afterwards the sort of camaraderie of going out. It's it's a once in a lifetime thing. None of those guys would be able to do that now. Their lives are in different places, but it was just at that specific moment it worked for everyone, and it was great. I can't believe it was 10 years ago.
It was 10 years ago?
Yeah, 10 years ago. It was 2011. Yeah.
Oh, my gosh.
Amazing.
I'm envious of getting to work with Brian Cox. That guy's a beast. I would love to work with him on anything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we talked about Manhunter a bunch of times on this show.
Yeah.
That's the best Hannibal Lecter. The other one.
Oh, yeah, by far. Yeah. By far, yeah. And Brian Cox has been the best of whatever he's done for pretty much his entire career, right?
Mm-hmm. It was, and it was before he got his comeback, in Succession and all that. So he was around and available too. And it's just nice. It's like Kiefer and I say, we work together every 25 years. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. But,
now, was there something about, because I know how hard it was, or, I know the struggles that you had with your father growing up, and now you're going back and doing this play. Did it reopen any of those emotional chambers to be going back and doing this play? Something that you saw when you were 6, something that your dad was working on, and what inspired him, motivated him to create this was to get you and your brother out, but ultimately it was the catalyst that ended up taking him away from you guys. And so was there any reconciliation, or was there anything about working on this play? Was it therapeutic for you in any way?
Well, certainly at the time, I mean, all the other actors would come to me to ask me questions about this or that, or the idea, or Scranton, or the play, or my father, or any little tidbits they could have. But I was pretty clear to them that I wanted this production to be about them, and I wanted the play to be new to me, because certainly as a child and through life, the play was the play. It was a thing that made him famous, that brought us out of poverty, that took him down, that he abused in his own ways, his own work. I wanted it to be fresh. And I would say to them very specifically that these parts are your parts, not the parts that were played by Charlie Durning or Paul Sorvino. They're yours. And I've never done this play. But I was struck by the beauty of the writing and the words, the specificity, the difference between a comma and a period or a dash, and the brilliance of 5 characters that spoke so differently, written by the same man. So I think, was it therapeutic? I don't know. It was nostalgic. It was a reminiscence to a more innocent time. It brought me back to when I was a child before everything changed. But I would think the best word, and I've used before, is more of a communion of spirit. I don't know if there's forgiveness or a therapeutic value, but and there may be, but I wouldn't be able to articulate it as much as I just felt that the best of his essence and spirit was on that stage as we all were doing it. So in that sense, there is a very joyous healing aspect to it, along with just the artistry and the balls ass fun.
Well, look, Jason, I can't thank you enough for coming and hanging out with us and taking this much time to talk to us. And again, you know, I'm thankful and I'm grateful for our friendship, and I really appreciate you coming and hanging out with us.
No, absolutely, man. Anything. I'm glad you guys. I'm glad you guys got this going on, and I hope you guys keep up with your relationship and artistically do the stuff you want to do.
Ty's got to keep writing to keep us generated. Ty and all the people involved.
That's all right.
You know how it goes, man. I wrote one thing that was considered successful, so now I've got like 10 things that people want to make with me. So we'll see if any of it actually happens. So, because the thing about Hollywood is you develop 10 things so that 0 of them can actually get made.
That's right. You get paid for each one, but none get made. Well, it's nice to meet you, Ty, as well.
Hey, it was nice to meet you, man.
Thanks, brother.
All right, take care, man.
Yeah, go ahead and close the show, Wes.
Say goodbye, Ty.
Goodbye, Ty.